Wonderful. With that, we'll transition to our group discussion, and then we'll close out the day with some concluding remarks. But Lucia, over to you.
Okay, so for this last 20 minutes, 25 minutes, we have time for questions or thoughts, lesson learned. I think it would be interesting to try to think what could we learn positively or negatively from the examples we had. I think there are interesting insights, very interesting insights. So really there is no real structure, but rather that we just raise our hand and I yield the floor to whoever wants to speak. And maybe while you think some question, I would like just to mention that as we speak, there is one of our PhD students, Delia Andries, that thanks to the collaboration with the University of California and the Rosenberg Forum, is working on PFAS in California. I sent her a couple of pictures and she said, I wish I was there. And she's working on this comparison, they're working on the case of California and PFAS, how to treat exactly the question about how much it costs, and they are really facing a lot of challenges in quantifying how much it costs to remove PFAS from wastewater. So that's really work in progress, and we look forward to find out what she will find in California. So just to open the floor, are there questions already? Okay, Ayman. So I have a question, then Ayman, and no. Okay, then I start with my question and then Ayman. Are there examples or experiences in Chile or in the US, or maybe also the keynote speaker might know of other places, of EPR, of extended producer responsibility applied to water or to other sectors that are very similar to water, treated wastewater, from where we could learn? Because as Carlos said, it's a big challenge, and the Commission is supposed to give guidelines, but I think they are as lost as any other national regulator. So not for being the Commission, they have the solution. So I think for me that would be really interesting if you know of any examples that could help us in addressing this issue. That would be my question, and then I will leave the floor to the other ones.
Thank you for your question, Lucia. In Chile, in water, there's no examples, there's no experience. Recently, in the last 2-3 years, we do have an application of extended responsibility for recycling. So if there's problems in recycling, it's the industry that has to come in and solve the problem. But in water, there's no example.
Yeah, to the best of my knowledge, I don't see any example from the global south particularly. Their wastewater is still not on the political agenda very much. The politicians still continue to consider that wastewater sits in the backyard somewhere, nobody sees it, and that's not their problem. And they continue prioritizing roads and bridges and stuff like that, which is visible. And that's where the problem is, because then when it actually drops down to the implementation of the policies, those are excellent, but nobody's actually taking care of them. I just give you an example. I was involved with the wastewater management strategy of Iraq. And they basically started from a very high end, that they would do this tertiary treatment and all that. And I kept on saying them, look, you don't have the resources to do that. Why don't you start from the basic, at least to collect all the wastewater, and then start the secondary treatment. So the issue in the global south is they idealize too much sometimes, but in the end, when the question about the funding comes in, things actually start dropping down. So So they would invest few $1 million in the planning stage, and then things will disappear. I'm talking about a span of 12 years, and nothing has happened, actually. So that's where I think the issue is, and that's where we continue working with some of the countries. Unless there is a very specific driver, like in Tunisia, say, for instance, they build the wastewater treatment plants from the tourism perspective, because they see that there is a lot of opportunity for the tourism, because that's close by Europe, and they can basically offer cheaper options to the tourism sector. And they have created some of the areas which have very good quality of water, but that has a very specific objective, not from the national point of view of protection of environment. Similarly with Jordan also, they treat and they reuse that wastewater, add it to their national wastewater budget. But they started also from a different angle, because they used to export smaller amounts of vegetables and fruits, and the neighboring countries actually started putting restrictions on them. And then they also realized that they are basically one of the most water scarce country, and they will have to invest in that direction. So I see what we are talking here, PFAS and stuff like that. This is too far at this stage when I see from the lens of Global South.
Thank you. So Ayman, maybe if you can grab a mic.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lucia. I think I'd like to start from where Professor Manzoor ended, and I was almost going to say the same. In the Global South, we are still far below this kind of PFAS issues. I don't think we are even into the level to understand what is the impact of this. And what Andrea has said is just raised even more concern in terms of like the presence of PFAS in groundwater. In the South, mostly we are relying on groundwater, and no one even think about having or thinking or thought about even presence of PFAS and other like say micro-pollutants in the groundwater. And that also made me like think of what is the likely reasons of this presence. Is there any kind of direct recharge, like injection to the groundwater, or is it something related to contamination after discharge, after abstraction? Or because for me, if you talk about natural recharge to groundwater, that should at least, this process should reduce or should at least filter to some extent those kind of nutrients before it's getting to the water. And if it is getting there, it means that it's not dissolved. It is something within the groundwater as a contaminant, but not really as a dissolved parameter of the groundwater. And therefore, it is really important to understand the process and to understand those kind of micro-pollutants and how they are behaving if they are going through the soil profile and they are not degraded, or they are not like absorbed, or they are not really suspended there, and they are just moving directly to the groundwater. So this is something that very, very serious, and perhaps we need to develop a better understanding for this mechanism. Thank you.
Are there more comments, questions? Okay, one, Surush, and then.
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of additional comments. This issue of PFAS, I think Ayman brought up a good point. So did Dr. Manzoor. Everything is relative. Even in the US, if I understand correctly, I'm not a PFAS person, but we have some experts in our water quality people working on it and never asked the question. Aren't the standards set maybe a little too high that has also brought this additional attention to the issue. I've heard this. I don't know if that's the case. So if that's true, then even in very sophisticated water quality facilities, and they try to remove the question is the cost effectiveness, whether it's needed or not. I don't know, but I wish we had some PFAS expert if that was the point. I remember with the TCE issue, I lived in Tucson for 20 years before moving to California. So at that time, the TCE issue was a big thing in South Tucson, mostly because of some aircraft manufacturing and paint removal, which leaked into the aquifer system and created a lot of health issues in South Tucson. Of course, it was one of the big EPA, or the EPA, I guess, Superfund sites to try to clean up the water. I don't know where that stands now, but they really worked on it for a long, long time. So that happens a lot in many of these places. Coming to the issue of okay. Hello? It is green. Hello? Does it work? Okay. All right. Yeah, so I live in Orange County, California, and I think Eric mentioned it. Orange County is where Newport Beach is in Southern California. Maybe some of you have seen the movie or the sitcom about it. City of Irvine is also fortunate enough to be in an area that, in terms of water quality, we have one of the most sophisticated treatment facilities in the world. In fact, almost 100 million gallons a day is treated to the highest quality that, in fact, is so pure that if they want to send it to be recharged to the groundwater, which they pipe it for about 4 or 5 miles, they have to add some minerals in order not to corrode the pipes, and that takes it. And the reason for doing that was that perception on the part of the people that they don't like to know that they're drinking the water that came just from the treatment plant. So they go recharge it for 2 years and pump it back again, and nobody's got any problem with it. So that perception issue is critical, although recently I heard they're changing the policies. People are accepting it, so it happens that we are moving in the right direction. And City of Los Angeles has finally learned from Orange County, and they are, Eric, am I right, that they are also having a major facility. So technology is there. The question is the money there? Because these are expensive treatments that may not work for many places. And as I said, in some countries, you have to at least start from the basics of removing some of the bad agents in the water, as opposed to try to worry about PFAS, et cetera, until the technology catches up. So that's my point.
Yeah, maybe I want to follow up a little bit. You know, I'm not the expert on that area, but I remember I was in Tucson. Tucson was taking the water from Salt River, the Central Arizona project. And so there were options. I remember, to talk about, you can use natural recharge, to the sewer lake, you can use natural recharge. And then there were people campaigning and say, okay, we need a treatment plant. It's like $1 billion facility, to treat the water before we pump it. And somehow it's very easy to scale people. The people eventually, I think, voted to have a facility, like $1 billion facility built. But the experts, I remember in Arizona Water Resources Department, they said, okay, there's no need for that. And there was those kind of situation going on. Maybe U.S. is too rich at the time, maybe not anymore. But those kind of situations that does happen.
Well, we were talking about PFAS. I'm not an expert in PFAS, but I've reviewed some literature. And I think that in every policy of water use, a key concept is the risk management approach. Because I read on a paper that on a study that were irrigating tomatoes with reclaimed water, an adult needed to ingest more than 9 kilos per day of tomato to reach the toxicological threshold of concern. So it doesn't make any sense to reach an absolute perfect quality if there's no evidence of health risk. And it applies not only for PFAS, but also for pathogens. For example, the European regulation, we have very strict quality requirements for irrigating vegetables. And the water that we are using for irrigating vegetables from the river has 10 times the concentration of E. coli. And there's no problem because there are not such controls. So I believe that a proper risk management approach is key because we should find the middle ground between tackling consumer reluctance by ensuring health, but also we should foster water use because otherwise water scarcity is going to be the only driver to foster use. So I think the key point is to find this middle ground between affordability and health protection.
I think there was a Julio.
No, just a comment. Guillermo mentioned the water rights issue. Who is the owner of the wastewater? In Tucson case, for example, I don't know if the owner is the river of Colorado River who is over-abstracted, over-allocated, because if I remove the water, down the river, somebody will complain. But the question is to tell you one example of what we are doing here. No? For example, now I am working in the city of Granada, where the water rights are before Columbus went to America, so before California, before anything else. So some farmers have very good quality water from the mountains, from the Sierra Nevada, the original one, the original Sierra Nevada. And so the city of Granada has grown, and now they need the water. And the thing we are doing is just sharing water rights. So the city of Granada gives the farmers reclaimed water with good quality, the European standard. It costs 20 cents, whatever. And the farmers get that free, because now, according to our law, the city of Granada has not. They get this free, but they get in exchange for this water, they get the water right from the Sierra Nevada good quality water. No? Everybody wins here. So sometimes it's easier just to do this trade of water quality. We are trading water quality, not water quantity. I believe maybe easier than from tap to toilet. That is also very. But we do also tap to toilet in Barcelona, but nobody knows that. No, they put the water 25 kilometers before the water treatment plant, and people is very happy, like in Tucson. But sometimes the solution is more creative in the sense of using the water right definition. Is that all?
Yeah.
I had a question and then a follow-up, and maybe, Carlos, you might be the first best person to answer. So there's an idea in the EU directive to maybe, would it be to reduce the treatment requirements for some water reuse for some nutrients with the destination of that going to agricultural irrigation? Was that the implication in there as to why you wouldn't be sort of going through full advanced water treatment for nitrogen and phosphorus for some of that water reuse?
Yes, the idea is not to implement those strict removal rates or limitations for the portion of water that is going to be reused. It has no sense, or it makes no sense, to remove nitrogen and phosphorus if later the water is going to be reused and the nitrogen and phosphorus is going to be reintroduced in order to fertilize the crop. So in that case, it's not an exception, but it's like you are not supposed to achieve the highest quality. But of course, the issue is that not 100% of the water, of the treated water, is going to be directly reused. So you will have to play with two water lines or whatever. Or you have to design a flexible water line. And that is what it really concerns us, how we are going to implement that.
Okay. And it struck my ears because we have a lot of water with a lot of nitrogen in it in California, groundwater, especially from a lot of long-time over-fertilization. And we have a couple of programs in the Institute and also lots of colleagues throughout ANR have been working on this for a long time, a lot longer than me. If we work with, we'll call them growers, but farmers, on trying to identify proper fertilization requirements, it doesn't necessarily result in proper fertilization. Like there's still, even if there is nutrients in the water that could be used by the plants under irrigation, it doesn't mean that there's still not a lot of fertilizer being applied. And so the principle of it, trying to get folks to do nitrogen testing of their water and so forth, it's a lot of communication, and there's a lot of incentives about being risk averse to still use fertilizers on your crops as well. So you may end up overloading your groundwater sources with nitrogen if you're maintaining the nutrients in that irrigation water, but there's not a reduction in fertilizer on the other side.
Just to mention that apart from the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, there is another directive for nutrients control. So there's like an overlapping of these two directives. And in that sense, this nitrate directive focuses on what you have said, on the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus to be used by farmers and how to limit this amount, and in order to avoid this pollution of the groundwater.
With the last point you mentioned, Eric, I'm not sure if you do that in your area, which is test the quality of water for nitrogen before you irrigate. Because farmers, at least in most countries, will analyze the soil fertility. But if they start to click that they should analyze also the nutrients in water, maybe they will still over-fertilize because of the risk protection that they get, but maybe it would reduce.
There's some. We have colleagues who are definitely trying to promote that strategy amongst others, yeah, for sure.
Are there, a comment over? And Christian, also, if you want to say anything, you are welcome to intervene.
I hope it's working. Yeah. No, it's a question, but it's linked to what you mentioned about affordability and quality versus cost. Did I understand you correctly that the EPA had changed the threshold from 400 parts per whatever to 4?
They had never regulated on it. They just gave health advisory.
Yeah.
And almost a decade ago, it was a lot higher. It went from like 400 to 200 to 70 to 4. And my understanding is the public health studies have been done say it should be 0, but the compromise was to make it at 4. And what's been happening in the U.S. is that they're as they set limits, these companies come up with alternatives, and then we study those, and then we realize those are just as bad. So even though we're setting limits on things, they're constantly making substitutes and still putting more of these products out there.
Okay. Because it's from a different point of view, but what I find a bit surprising is we are talking a lot about the need for investment, which in the case of the EU with the wastewater, it's going to be a lot more. In the US, based on the map that you have showed, clearly there is a need for investment. Everyone is talking about public-private partnership, etc. Normally, you associate water with a regulated business, so you're looking for like a sort of a reasonable return. You are not going to make a killing, but you are expecting some sort of stability. So I can deal with, demand risk, but, if 8 years ago you are telling me that 400 is okay, and now it's 4, I mean,
Well, it's mostly because the studies weren't done, right? I mean, they said it's high because you don't know yet, and then as you do the study, right? But this is all based on science. They didn't just pull these numbers. So, I mean, Europe has a PFAS issue just like the US, right? I mean, every NATO base is going to have it, every military base, every airport. And you all are talking about banning them as well, right? In consumer products, and many European countries have acted, right? Sweden, the Netherlands, a handful of countries. I was in Germany in the fall, and they were talking about new legislation there, and which essentially made 3M leave the country, and they're no longer producing. But even after that, we're going to have this residual impact of where they are in our community. And the more, I think one of the things about all of these great innovations about reusing water is we can get more uses out of the water, right? So from a conservation standpoint, it's great. But I think PFAS is an unintended consequence then, because now we're moving it through the system and we're actually contaminating areas where it wasn't, where the water was relatively pristine. So it is this weird, unintended consequence of something good almost in our water management strategies.
Okay, thank you.
And maybe just to add on to this, my reflections are a bit dated, but when I was in grad school for my master's, I had an internship for the EPA, and one of my tasks was mapping PFAS concentrations around one of the DuPont factories in Ohio. And it was really interesting because a lot of the chemicals are grandfathered in, there was a higher level burden of proof. You had to actually prove harm versus if you introduce a chemical, the standards are lower because it's new. And so when you have that burden of proof for human health impacts, it is very hard to correlate the two. And so I think that might also contribute to these different levels of certainty in studies and what are we kind of attributing causation to. And I think it's really made it a really challenging process to pinpoint action.
Yeah, I like your actually point about private-public partnership. On one hand, we are promoting private-public partnership in particularly in the global south, and there are emerging bright spots coming out of that. But you are right, if by the change in the guidelines, say for instance, and the standards, what would be the fate of that? And if there would be need to change that, who will provide that type of investment? Because usually what my observation is that there is a standard agreement between the private sector and the government funding, and they install a traditional, or you can say a more like generic municipal wastewater treatment plant. But if there are very specific type of contaminants, those start coming in, and there are standards, those are changed, then there will be a huge difference in the cost element. And that would actually then question the investment, and particularly the private sector would really make sure that they are not losing out of that. But this is really an excellent point, and I like it. And I think perhaps it's good to really follow up on those public-private partnerships to see how they envisage when these type of interventions come in place. Yeah. Thank you very much.
So I will have a last comment, and I think it's time to close. I mean, also, if people start leaving, that means it's time. They are already thinking about the following committee. So just to make sure we just not remain here for people. No, and I think we have enough time for discussion. So
I'll be brief. It's coming back to PFAS. And what I believe is that as technology advances and progress, the detection thresholds become even lower. And nowadays we can detect almost anything in water. So maybe 10 years ago we talked about 10 PFAS, but nowadays we can talk about 100 substances that are potentially classified as PFAS. So I think that research and policy should try to focus on identifying a short number of PFAS with the greatest risk of health or harm in order to develop feasible protocols for wastewater treatment plants so that we could make this monitoring feasible and that we are not requiring to monitor 100 substances at the concentrations of nanogram per liter. So we were talking before, try to find this middle ground, I think is important.